So when the proposals from central government came out last year, local government New Zealand was coordinating a group of regional councils to explore those regional differences in relation to the proposals in a bit more detail, as a way to inform our submissions and also inform the regional sector input into the central government development of that package of measures. So the Bay of Plenty Regional Council was one of those. When I was speaking to Rachel about presenting on these, we didn't actually have final decisions at that point. So those were announced in May, and at the beginning of this month, we had the actual details of the regulations. So the work that we did last year was quite outdated in light of the final decisions and the detailed regulations. So we did spend a bit of time over the last month updating that analysis that was carried out last year. And the point to share that here is not to relitigate the final decisions as regional councils. You know, once central government makes final decisions, we just get on with implementation. And there's a large group of my colleagues at the regional council that have been gearing up for that for quite a while, with the first set of those regulations coming into force next week. But I think the point to look back at how the final decisions have landed in terms of impact on the agriculture sector is to first look at how we're going to manage implementation, and also potentially even prioritize the support that will be available with implementation from the likes of initiatives like the Jobs for Nature program, and also bearing in mind that some decisions are still pending, or the detail of them is still pending, particularly the farm planning requirements, and others that the ministers have said will actually be reviewed next year as well. So I'll cover that in a bit more detail in a second. I should also say that we could probably have an entire conference looking at the Action for Healthy Waterways package. It was a very comprehensive set of measures, and I'm only looking at a selection of them, the ones that we thought would probably have a significant impact in the Bay of Plenty and only the agriculture sector. There would obviously be very big implications for ratepayers and regional councils and implementing those things, but I'm not looking at that today. I think that's everything that I wanted to say as an introduction. So before getting into the specific proposals and final decisions, I just wanted to provide a bit of context for the Bay of Plenty. So in terms of, if we use the 2017 version of the NPS, our river and stream water quality is relatively good compared to other regions, thanks to a large extent to the fact that almost 3/4 of our region is in either native bush or exotic forestry. We do have, I cannot use the pointer, but for the, it doesn't matter. We do have some quite sensitive receiving environments around the Rotorua lakes, and also a number of harbors and estuaries. And we are pretty sure that those sensitive receiving environments will be the main drivers of limit setting as we implement the NPS in our region. On the Rangitaiki and Kaituna plains, we have quite highly modified environments, essentially drained wetlands, where there's been a lot of dairy intensification over the last couple of decades. So we do see some issues there as well. There's, at the moment, for the last few years, this has been a very strong trend of conversion from pasture and arable into horticulture, which we think could have both environmental and economic benefits as well. I'll get into that in a bit more detail in a second as well. So the first set of proposals that we looked at, and this is based on the original proposals from last year. As I said before, we haven't got final decisions on these yet, was the farm planning requirements. So we do think that farm planning, and this goes back to my earlier point about the importance of context, in this case between different properties. We do think that farm plans would actually result in significant benefits, both in environmental performance by having that ability to tailor changes in practices to specific circumstances, and also potentially in farm financial performance as well. We also expect farm plans to generate some important baseline information in terms of practice and contaminant loss, which is actually not available or accessible to regional councils at the moment, and that baseline information will be critical to implement the NPAs. Obviously, unfortunately, we probably won't have that information for the first deadline of the NPAs to have regional plans notified by 2024, but it would still be available shortly thereafter, hopefully. In terms of costs, there are administration costs in terms of developing those plans, auditing them and certifying them, and those would be ongoing, the certification and auditing. The big cost, as we see it for farm planning, is in the actual implementation of good management practices. And we have treated those as a yearly loss in baseline profit. But bear in mind that the actions that farmers commit to within farm plans don't have to be put in place on day one. They could stretch those over time, sort of minimize the impact there. One issue that we did have with the proposal was that it was applicable to pastoral and arable properties over 20 hectares and horticulture properties over 5 hectares. And there's actually quite a large number of properties in the Bay of Plenty that would be below those thresholds. Given the benefits that we expect to see from farm plans, we would like to have the smaller properties included. If they're not included in the national regulations next year, that is something that we would consider within our own regional plans as well. The other issue with farm plans is the capacity to deliver. There's just not enough qualified farm planners out there at the moment to meet the dates that were originally proposed, and even to deliver what is required now under existing regional plans. So a way to address that would be to prioritize catchments or contaminants that are a higher priority, even if we have a longer lead-in time. Just checking that I didn't want to make any other point about farm plans before moving on. So the next proposal that we looked at was stock exclusion. So the key changes from the original proposal to the final decisions here were in terms of the setback requirements. So the original proposals we're proposing a 5-meter setback. The final decision only has a 3-meter setback, and also it excludes pre-existing fences. So where there was a pre-existing fence, they don't necessarily have to meet that setback requirement. So this was quite important for the dairy industry, which under the Dairy and Clean Streams Accord, the vast majority of dairy farmers we assume will already be complying with the final requirement. For dry stock, we don't really know how prevalent pre-existing fencing is, but for the purpose of this analysis, we just made the assumption that it was 50%. So the costs that I've got estimated there are about a third of what we estimated in the original assessment of the original proposals. And again, the lost profit in setbacks is only a fraction of that, and many are applicable to the dry stock sector. In terms of the benefits of stock exclusion, I think these are widely understood. I'm not going to go into detail there, but I did want to raise the point that by having narrower setbacks and also excluding pre-existing fences, the benefits will be lower than they were in the original proposal. I couldn't tell you, we cannot quantify how much lower, but they will definitely be lower. In the context of post-COVID, the creation of employment is also a significant benefit there, and again, that touches on the support that is expected to be provided by central government through the likes of Jobs for Nature. So we used a characterization of farm and orchard systems done for us by Perinag and Manakifenoa Land Care Research for the two water management areas where we were implementing the NBS. So the blue bars here show the baseline operating profit. The red bars show the annualized cost of farm plants, and the green bars, which you can hardly see now, show the annualized stock exclusion cost. And the orange dots show the final operating profit after you take care of stock exclusion and farm plants. So you can see there's a striking difference between dairy, dry stock, and kiwi fruit, and also, yeah, just the estimate of the impact that farm planning and stock exclusion would have there. So moving on to the nitrogen attributes, the big discussion that you would hear in the media and across different sectors when the proposals were asked for consultation was in relation to dissolved inorganic nitrogen and dissolved reactive phosphorus. In our region, we didn't think those two were particularly, we didn't think that they would make a significant difference because of those sensitive receiving environments that I talked about at the beginning. Our understanding was that the contaminant reductions that we needed to provide for ecosystem health in estuaries and in lakes was going to generally be more stringent than what we would have needed to do to comply with those proposed bottom lines for DIN and DRP. Obviously, in the final decisions, DIN was not included and DRP was included only as in relation to coming up with action plans, and there's no bottom line for DRP there. The final decisions did strengthen the bottom line for nitrogen and ammonia toxicity. So based on the latest, well, not quite the latest, up to 2019, I think it is, monitoring of our long-term monitoring sites, we don't have any sites that breach those strengthened bottom lines, except in drains and drainage canals. So it's a bit unclear at this point whether we would actually have specific objectives for those sites, given that they have a narrower set of freshwater values. There are not taking my kids swimming in any of those sites anytime soon. So the impact of that one is a bit uncertain at this point. But I also make the point again that the minister has said that they will reconsider the introduction of dissolved inorganic nitrogen next year, subject to additional evidence on the environmental and economic impact. So that one hasn't completely died just yet. Another one of the proposals was restrictions on land use intensification. A big change from the original proposal to the final decision in terms of the Bay of Plenty was the fact that irrigated horticulture, so particularly kiwi fruit and avocado, which is quite a strong land use change trend in the Bay of Plenty at the moment, was not included there. There was quite a bit of concern that that proposal was going to restrict that conversion, which, as I said earlier, we think if people are adhering to good management practice could result in both environmental and economic benefits. So there would be some administrative costs for anybody that wants to essentially convert to pasture, but we don't think there will be any, at the moment anyway, any such conversion. And we were also wondering if that restriction is effectively a moratorium on those conversions because of the difficulty in establishing the baseline contaminant losses at a particular point in time, which is what the regulations require. So the benefits, yeah, are that very strong protection to any increase in contaminant loss because of land use change. Another one of the proposals that we looked at was the E. coli bottom line for swimming sites during the bathing season. So the map on the left shows the pre-existing E. coli assessment that was in the NPS before. The map on the right shows the assessment under the new attribute table, but bearing in mind that both tables are actually in the NPS. So under the original table 9, which is called in the NPH 2020 now, we had 11 sites that were considered not suitable for swimming. Under the new one, we have 20 out of 42 sites that are not considered suitable for swimming. So the point that we raised in our submission was that the new attribute table was based on the 2003 microbiological water quality guidelines, which are recognized within the discussion document itself and in other scientific documents as being outdated. So we were a bit concerned that we were having this new attribute table based on outdated science. This graph here shows the current state for the sites that failed that new bottom line. The new bottom line is the red line. And you can see the difference between the light blue bars and the dark blue bars. So the light blue bars is the 95th percentile, which is the new bottom line. The dark blue bars is the median. So the big differences between the 95th percentiles and the medians suggest, according to our scientists, that could be explained by rainfall events, which is when people wouldn't be swimming anyway. So the new attribute is, the new bottom line is significantly higher than what we had before. And it will take a lot of, even achieving the previous standard of swimmability was quite challenging in some locations. So this one is going to be even more challenging if we could even achieve it at all. So the last one that we looked at briefly was the limit on nitrogen fertilizer input at 190 kilos per hectare per year. In the Bay of Plenty, where most farmers, the vast majority of farmers, are using well below that limit, except perhaps for a dozen of them in certain parts of the region. How am I going for time?
You are
okay. Yep.
already 15 minutes.
Yep.
So if you can wrap up, please. Yeah. So
the requirement for dairy farmers to report their fertilizer use, we think is useful, because obviously we didn't have that before. It's a bit unclear why that requirement didn't also extend to dry stock. And as I say in the slide there, we do see potentially a risk of increased fertilizer use by having a limit significantly higher than current practice. For those or so farms that are slightly above the limit now, there was also the concern that they could just replace fertilizer use by using imported feed, which wouldn't actually result in a change in water quality. But I also return to the point I made earlier that the minister has said that this is one of the ones that would actually be reviewed in 2023. So just to conclude, in general, the costs of the final decisions are significantly lower, at least in the Bay of Plenty, compared to the original proposals, particularly stock exclusion, which was the big one originally. I also make the point there that there is likely to be significant support from central government through Jobs for Nature in terms of implementation. And considering how the final decisions has landed for different farming sectors may help to prioritize the allocation of that support. Yep, once again, I'm really looking forward to having those detailed farm planning regulations with the caveat that we will have to think about the smaller properties. And yeah, just finalize on my initial point about the importance of context. We're doing questions at the end, are we? Or